This is Head Bustin' Boxing, and we are back in the house. And in light of some of the comments that has been made by Eddie Hearn in the midst of the negotiations for the Ruiz Joshua rematch, um, I decided to look into some of the rules by the sanctioning bodies, especially after I heard Bob Arum come out and state that the IBF rules will overrule the rematch clause. So I'm going to go through some of the sanctioning body rules, and we're going to see if what Eddie Hearn is saying is true, far as this match has to take place, and if Andy Ruiz doesn't live up to the rematch clause, that he would basically take him to court and he wouldn't be able to fight anybody else, etc., etc. All right, then we're gonna start with the IBF. This was the first one I found, and the reason why I found this one so easily because Bob Arum had already put it out there. But this is sanctioning. This is the IBF sanctioning body, and it's Rule 5A1. And it states, a champion and a challenger must at all times set high ideals and act in a sportsmanlike manner. Any action by a champion, challenger, or cornerman which reflects poorly on the IBF. Matter of fact, excuse me, let's skip down to A1. My bad. Mandatory defenses. And it says, because of the circumstances inherent in a peculiar to the promotion of the majority heavyweight championship contest, the heavyweight champion shall defend his championship within 1 year after acquisition by him in a sanctioning contest scheduled for 12 rounds against the leading available contender designated by the championship chairman. That's the same thing as a mandatory. After compliance with his mandatory defense obligation throughout the remaining term of a heavyweight championship reign, he shall be obligated to mandatorily defend his championship within intervals of no more than 9 months against the leading available contender in the heavyweight division as designated by the championship chairman. Then it goes on to say, and this is 5A2, optional defenses. In the interim periods, the heavyweight champion may enter into a contest with any heavyweight contender rated in the top 15 boxers in his weight class as set forth in the ratings of the IBF USBA, and subject to the approval of the championship's chairman and the president. All optional defenses, and any and all other bouts by a champion shall be concluded at least 60 days prior to the date the champion's mandatory is due, and shall be subject to the approval of the championship's chairman and the president. Now here's where it gets interesting. Should the champion lose his title in an optional defense against an opponent other than the leading available contender. Now, this is what happened with AJ and Ruiz. AJ lost his title to someone that was not the leading contender. The new champion, that will be Ruiz, shall be required to make his mandatory title defense against the leading available contender as designated by the championship chairman within a period of 9 months after this acquisition. Okay, so in other words, the mandatory is the most important thing. Now, that's a little tricky. If you have a situation where it's like a unification thing going on, then that might supersede that. All right. Now let's check out IBF rule 3A and 3B. Now this is where it really gets interesting. It says, rule 3, clauses in championship contracts. 3A, purpose. The purpose of this rule is to ensure that no contract provision interferes with mandatory defense of title. See, like I said, that mandatory, that's big unless you got something that overweights that, like I said, a unification perhaps, or an undisputed match where two champions are fighting for all the marbles. But anyway, it says 3B return bouts. No contract for a championship contest shall contain any clause or any provision whatsoever guaranteeing or in any way assuring or promising either contesting a return championship contest whether such clause or provision interferes with the mandatory defense of a title. See that don't sound too good for Eddie Hearn. I mean, that almost sounds like there is no rematch clause. But let's move on. Let's see what the WBA has to say about it. And the WBA has a rule, the WBA rule C5 is what I found, and it says rematch provisions in bout contracts are not binding on the association. So in other words, all this rematch mess doesn't really hold when it comes to the WBA. I mean, not saying that they can't do a rematch, but it's not binding according to the WBA. Let's see what the WBO has to say. And the rule I found for that was regulations section 18, and it reads as following: the WBA shall not allow direct return fights unless recommended by the World Championship Committee and authorized by the Executive Committee. A direct return fight is a fight between the new champion and the former champion from whom the new champion won the title, or between the new champion and the losing contestant in a vacant title fight before the new champion defends his title against any of the other fighters classified in this category. If the World Championship Committee determines either that the resolution of a championship contest was subsequently irregular, or that there was a clear misapplication of the rules of boxing resulting in a manifest unfairness, such that in either case the World Championship Committee determines that the championship was subsequently unresolved. The World Championship Committee may, in its discretion, recommend a direct return fight, which may be authorized only by the majority vote of the Executive Committee. The World Championship Committee may recommend a direct return fight for any other circumstance in the event a direct return fight shall only be authorized by the affirmative vote of not less than 75% of the Executive Committee. So in other words, when you take a look at this stuff, according to the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF, that AJ Ruiz fight does not have to take place. Now, I don't know what was said in the contract, what clauses was put in there or whatnot. Especially with the WBA, it made it quite clear that ain't no real such thing as no return clause according to them. And the WBO is basically saying the same thing. Now, the IBF is a little different, but basically they're saying the mandatory will supersede that. So it sounds like to me Ruiz has some loopholes as far as getting out of this return fight if he really wanted to, in my opinion. I'm gonna look a little more into the rules, but this is what I found so far. So if I'm Eddie Hearn, if Ruiz trying to work with me and do the rematch, man, give that man what he want. If he want, if he want a couple extra dollars, give it to him. If he want to fight in Vegas, make that happen. If he want to fight in Mexico, make that happen. But you might want to get on the ball, especially with the IBF, because according to them, that mandatory take a higher priority than anything that you got to offer anyway. Because it's not like AJ has another title, so you can't say it's a unification fight. And it wasn't anything irregular that took place in the fight for you to guarantee a rematch, according to some of the stipulations that we just read. I believe that was with the WBO. So Eddie, you might want to hurry up and make this thing happen. Give that man what he wants, so you can get your rematch with AJ and see what happens. If not, you might mess around and lose that opportunity. But anyway, this is pretty much all I got. This head busting boxing fight doctor. Hit that like button, hit that share button, hit that subscribe button. Hit me up in the comment section. Let me know what you think about the video. Hey, if you know anything else as far as the rules that might apply to this so-called rematch clause, hit me up and let me know. Or maybe I'll put it in the next video dealing with this. But anyway, this head busting boxing fight doctor. I am out.